Tuesday, May 27th. I'm Katie Logan-Hedges, Chair of the Finance Committee, and with me we have committee members Tom Duval, and we have the Mayor, City Auditor, fellow council people, and all priority safety. So we will go ahead and get started. Jeff Honan is not here today due to a pre-planned absence, but everyone else is here. We sent out the committee meeting minutes from April 29th, which was our last committee meeting. Tom, did you see any corrections?
Move to record as submitted.
All right, I will second that. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, so we have two items on our agenda this evening. Both are new business. Both relate to the potential possibility of a safety levy that has been discussed as a potential way to address some of the shortfalls that we have in the budget. So before we read the agenda items, I'm going to turn it over to the Mayor, who has prepared a presentation, and let her speak to that, and then we'll address the items specifically on the agenda.
Thanks, Councilperson Katie Logan-Hedges. I do have a presentation for this evening's for the consideration of the committee for an income tax levy. And so we'll just jump right in here. This .5 is for public safety and street improvement. So this is different than what we have seen the last couple times. So the purpose of this proposal, and I apologize if you're not able to see this, you should have a copy of this presentation in your email. It was also forwarded to the clerk for anyone in the public that would like a copy. So the purpose of this proposal is a funding explanation. So this is all of the funds that are used to fund what I am proposing this evening. The most recent income tax levy expired on December 31st of 2024. We all know that. It was in effect from January 1, 2020 until December 31st, 2024. That levy funded critical services and that need to continue to be funded, and it is our responsibility to try to figure out how to continue to provide those services to our citizens as government is a service-based institution. And so this is to allocate revenue to fire and EMS and street infrastructure, and then this allows us to maintain safety and community quality of life through both of these projects. So this is the way that our city income tax is currently divided up. You have our general fund, that is our Fund 101, that has 81% of the original 1% income tax that all municipalities throughout the state have. It's a 1%, that's the flat. In our second one is the Capital Improvement .4 Income Tax Fund, Fund 206. This specifically funds street improvement, storm sewers, parks, and city lighting. In 1988, the citizens of Circleville voted for a .5 tax levy for operating and capital costs of safety forces. Again, in 2014, there was a safety levy that was put on with capital improvement funds. That is 216. The other piece of that is the previous .4. That was a .5 permanent levy for operating and capital costs of safety forces. And then lastly, the rest of the original 1% is funded into Fund 306. That is used for capital expenditures of all government activities. So that is the total current 2.0 income tax rate that the city has.
And so just to clarify, that's at 2%, which began in January of this year. Previous to that, for the previous 5 years, it was 2.5% because the extra 0.5% went to support safety purposes.
That's correct. So these are some numbers for you. I put them in this. These are all of the funds that I just talked about, and their yearly revenue specifically related to income tax receipts. You'll see next to that it says total fund revenue because many of these funds have other revenue pieces that go into them other than the income tax. So like the general fund is the general fund, it has a lot of other revenue sources that go into it. Grant dollars, fees, different things like that. So you'll see, starting in 2019, the income tax receipts for the General Fund 101 was $2.672 million. The total fund for that same year was $5.676 million. And then you get all the way up to 2025 because we are only 4 months into the year. This was reflected as of May 1st of 2025. The report that was sent out by the auditor's office has our current revenue in the general fund from income tax receipts as $1.244 million. Any questions on 101? Okay, next is 206. Again, this is used for street improvements. You'll see the receipts were there of 1.297 in 2019. Total fund revenue of 1.655, all the way up to this year, current receipts of 614,000, and total revenue fund of 778,000. This was the note down at the bottom. This was part of the income tax levy that was approved by the voters in May of 2014. Safety Forces .5 tax fund, Fund 212. This is the income tax levy that was approved by the voters in 1988. This is where the campaign for this original levy was Citizens for a Safer Circleville when Mayor Mike Logan was mayor. And so you can see in 2024, this fund for income tax brought in $2.254 million. The total revenue for that fund was $3.209. That is about $1 million difference, and that is because Fund 212 also receives all of our EMS billing. So when our emergency squads go to take care of our citizens at their house, the revenue that comes from those services is placed into 212. Last year, that was about $880,000 that we brought in specifically from EMS billing.
And so this levy campaign in 1988 was permanent, correct?
Yes, both of the income tax levies that funded the .4 and the .1 plus this .5 were permanent levies. This is the second part of the 2014 levy that went towards income tax in 212 for safety forces. You'll see this one has generated anywhere between $325,000 up to $415,000. This specific income tax fund does not have any additional revenue that goes into it. This is solely income tax receipts. And all of these numbers were from revenue reports from the city's software. So I have copies of those. I can reproduce those for you to have those specific numbers. This is the Capital Improvement Fund, 306. The total over the last 6 years has been anywhere between $128,000 up to $388,000. This fund did have additional revenue that went into it up until last year, and the income tax receipts was the total fund revenue.
Okay, so all of those are what make up the 2% and are permanent, existing, no
Yes.
changes to any of those.
Yep, no changes to any of those, and that is currently what funds, these funds are what currently fund our police department and our fire department. Okay, so the most recent levy we know was from 2020 to 2024. This was Fund 227. It was passed in November of 2019. It was effective January 1. It provided critical funding for fire, EMS, and police operations. It did expire last year. We are currently operating off of reserves in our other funds to operate our safety forces. It helps maintain staffing levels, response times, and equipment. We know the voting history. In November 2023, it failed. March of 2024, it failed. And in November of 2024, it failed.
So one thing I would note about that is when it passed back in 2018, it passed considerably. It was a marketed win. When it failed in November of 2023, it was by a pretty slim margin, and every time since then, it has failed by a greater margin. So we seem to have lost some traction in that regard. If we could go back one slide though, on your bullet point number 4, when it talks about help to maintain staffing levels, can you speak to, can you quantify that at all?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
in a couple more slides.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so Fund 227, the annual revenue that was brought in specifically for this fund in 2020 was $1.256 million. In 2024, we were at $2.354 million. And so far this year, the year-to-date revenue is $399,000. We did leave some expenses in 227 to be paid for out of any carryover funds that were left in that account, plus this $399,000.
And the 399 is gathering collected income tax through 12/31 of 2024. So when will does that stop after the first quarter?
Mark has already seen a steady decline of those receipts coming into this fund.
Because at some point it will completely.
It will go away.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so 2024 expenses for fire EMS across all funds. This includes more than just the funds that we talked about earlier where the income tax goes. Their total expenses for the year was $5.481 million. $3.811 million of that went to personnel services and benefits. It's about 70%. And then the other expenses were $1.67 million.
Can you give us an example of other expenses?
Equipment, the medical director for the EMS, other contract services, would office supplies.
Would that include any grant match?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so the city income tax funding that is proposed this evening is again leaving everything the same for the general fund, the 0.4 income tax, the 0.5 tax fund, the 0.1 income tax fund, and then we would, my proposal is to add 2 additional funds, one specifically for fire and EMS. The fund number is to be determined by the auditor, to cover operating and capital costs of fire EMS. And then for the same, specific fund for street improvement for construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of streets.
So to confirm, your proposal is adding, what's the percent?
0.5.
0.5, and it is divided in a way that you're gonna explain.
Yep.
Between street improvements.
Yep.
And the other portion being fire and EMS only.
That's correct.
Okay.
So you received the full ordinance language in your email this past weekend, and when we get to the portion of the meeting where that's read, this is just a summary of what it says. So this is to increase the tax rate by 0.5 from 2.0 to 2.5. 0.4 is allocated for fire apparatus, EMS equipment, personnel, stations, training, and related expenses per the Ohio Revised Code sections 145.48 and 742.34. That's directly from the ordinance. And then 0.1 is allocated for street, road, and bridge maintenance and repair. The ordinance directs the Pickaway County Board of Elections to place the levy on the ballot in November of 2025. It is declared emergency ordinance for timely implementation after it's passed. because by the time it is passed, it will need to go to the Board of Elections, and there is a very short time window. So, staffing that was funded through the 2019 levy. So this was the 0.5 that started in 2020 and ended in 2024. It allowed the city to fund positions. These were positions that were already created by ordinance. We didn't create new positions. We simply funded these positions by allocating the 227 funds to pay for them. That included 5 police officers, 2 communications officers, and 3 firefighters. Again,
Okay, so
those were funded through the levy.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can we talk about, when you quantify staff and positions that it funded, can you explain that to us, like in a shift mentality?
Yeah, so specifically for fire, because that's what we're specifically talking about, before March of 2025, each shift had 8 firefighters on a shift. 6 of those, 2 per shift, were from the SAFER grant, and I'll talk about that here in a second. The levy funded 1 person per shift. So we went from 5 people in 2019, when we didn't have the 227 funds, to 6 per shift in 2020.
Due to the levy.
Due to the levy.
Okay.
Solely due to the levy. In 2022, we changed the structure and we increased that by 6 people because of the SAFER grant that was given to the city, or awarded to the city, I'm sorry. That took us from 6 per shift up to 8.
And when does that grant expire?
It expires in March of 2026.
Okay, so that's a separate discussion to the levy, but that is already expending itself, so we'll be back to pre-SAFER grant levels,
Yes.
which would be 6, but pre-levy level
It's
would
5.
take it to 5.
Yeah.
So it would be a drop of 3 firefighters per shift.
Or a total of 9 people, or 1 full shift.
Okay, and that also doesn't take into account the growth of the city through the housing levels.
That's correct.
Okay.
So this is the proposal if it does not pass, is that what you're saying?
No, this is your proposal now. I'm just trying to quantify how
I'm
many.
just saying you
people-
talked about where would go back to if it didn't pass.
Yeah, if
Yeah, sorry.
unfortunately, without the funding, we would basically have to go back to pre-levy levels.
Clarification of, I understand.
Yeah.
I just, because I think, I'm not sure people understand that.
Yeah,
And so I understand that your proposal is for fire, but I would like to go through the same exercise, if you don't mind, for the communications officer and the police officers. What did the pre-levy level look like for those 2?
so it was 2 less, so we're at 7 police officers, or sorry, 7 in the communications center, and we would be going down to 5, which includes the communications supervisor.
So over the course of a typical shift, how many police officers are on the road?
2.
That's now.
Mm-hmm.
And you have 1 comms officer,
Yes.
and then you have 1 officer that is at the police department.
Mm-hmm.
So typically 4 across
Mm-hmm.
the board. Okay, so with, again, the failure of the safety levy, that's a whole a separate discussion of loss of services there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so this is from our current staffing levels by ordinance for the fire department specifically. So we have 1 chief, 3 captains, 3 lieutenants, 12 firefighter EMTs, the SAFER grant positions, and then part-time 18 firefighters. On the right, you'll see whether it's filled or not, or at what level it's filled. We have 1 chief, we have a chief, Chief Thompson. We have 3 captains, 3 lieutenants. Of the 12 firefighter EMTs, we have 10 filled because we had 2 vacancies due to promotions. And then we have 6 staff who are filling positions by the SAFER grant,
And again, that separate discussion, but expires.
March of 26.
Okay.
So part-time firefighters, we have 0 positions filled for part-time firefighters. One of the things that we always hear when we're talking about the safety levy or about an income tax levy is, why can't we apply for grants? And so this is an example of grants that our fire department has received over the last 7 years. So you'll see on the far, when I'm looking at this screen, it's on my left, the AFG monies. You'll see $100,000 for SCBA equipment, $563,000 for a fire engine, $80,000 for an exhaust system, $928,000 for a ladder truck, $1.565 million for 6 personnel, for a total of $3.258. Now what happens when you get grant is typically there's a city match that has to go along with it. So that's not all just money that goes into our pocket for us to spend as the city. So these are the matches that we have had to put forth in order to accept these grants. And so you'll see that in the SAFER line, I have 2 stars there. And I have 2 stars there because there are additional items in our contract that we pay for that aren't being funded by that amount of money. Does that make sense? Like their uniform and accessories and overtime is not paid for by the SAFER grant. So those are amounts that the city is paying. And I do have information for each of those individuals. And then lastly, for the ladder truck, you'll see we have a $494,000 investment through a loan that we are responsible for.
Even if you take out the SAFER grant, it's still nominal. I mean, the city match is literally like 4% or 3%
Yeah.
or something very minor.
So my point with grants is twofold. One, we are applying for grants and we are being awarded them. But the second is we do typically have a city match, and all but one of those is for equipment, not personnel. And so with 70% of our total expenses for fire going to personnel, more of our grant dollars would have to equal the same percentage.
What is the asterisk by the ladder truck?
The asterisk by the ladder truck is the $464,000 loan that is not included in the city match portion. Okay, so we've mentioned SAFER grant a couple of times. So SAFER stands for Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. This is a grant that was applied for by the fire chief and this one of the previous safety directors through FEMA. And that grant was in the amount of $1.565 million. The grant period of performance is from March 2023 to March 2026. Any additional levy funding would maintain these core positions beyond the grant period. Any questions? Okay, so why is point 4 for fire and EMS critical? And again, I apologize that these are pretty small up here on the screen, but you can see from 2019 to 2024, our call volume is increasing. In 2019, the fire department and EMS responded to 3,088 calls. In 2020, it was 3,516 calls. 2021, 3,981. 2022, 4,603, 2023, 4,605, and then last year, 4,853 runs. In addition to that, we have aging apparatus and equipment that needs to be replaced because we want our equipment when those guys go into a burning building to work properly. We want the equipment that they use to serve our citizens to work properly as well. We have staffing pressure amid growing demand with housing in the area. We do a lot of mutual aid runs as well with township fire departments that are surrounding us, with Pickaway Township and Deer Creek EMS and Pickaway. So without the funding, there's potential cuts to staffing and slower response times. that is what we would have to do without the funding. So what the .4 will fund: firefighter and EMS personnel wages and benefits, ambulance and fire apparatus purchase and maintenance, fire station upkeep and communications equipment. They use radios to talk to one another, and there's equipment in the fire department that allows them to do that and get dispatched in here when they need a mutual aid call. And then training, rescue operations, and employer contributions. So why is the .1 for streets needed? In the previous proposals, we proposed, or it was proposed, .4. And so we heard in a service committee meeting earlier this year that we have a lot of streets that are needing to be repaired. We also hear from our citizens frequently that their street needs to be paved. In my State of the City earlier this year, I talked about the amount it costs to pave one street. And in my opinion, it was pretty astronomical what we paid per foot of or per mile of street within the city. And I actually don't have my notes, I just have my PowerPoint, but I can provide those for you. So many streets are deteriorated and require repair. We heard that our streets have been rated based on a system with our engineering firm Strand to look at our streets and see where the criticality of the repairs that are needed to that, in addition to the work that our utilities operations are doing. Those two things need to be matched up so that we're not tearing up a street that we're just going to tear up again. We're not paving a street that we're just going to tear up 6 months later to put in a water line or a sewer line. And so this provides needed support for street improvements. So we know that we personally and our citizens want safe and maintained roads to improve traffic safety and emergency access. Infrastructure upkeep maintains property values and quality of life. When people have roads that they're able to drive on, they're able to get from their house to the store, or they're able to get from their house to the hospital. They want streets that they're able to drive on and get there safely. So what's it gonna fund? So it's gonna fund resurfacing, reconstruction, and pothole repair, curb and gutter maintenance, preventative maintenance such as crack sealing and drainage fixes, and matching funds for grants and larger projects. An example of a street grant that we have applied for is the Southport Street grade separation. $20 million to do that project, to be able to extend our road up and over the railroad so that people can get from downtown to our store area, our retail area on 23 South. And so we are also getting funding from OPWC. I talked to the service director today about the different grants that we get already for these types of repairs. So it's not that we are not applying for these grants, and it's not that we're not getting money from other places. We are. We're bringing in revenue from other sources. The cost is going up just as much as it is, and the need is great. There are many projects that have been put on hold for years that we haven't attended to, that we are now having to attend to. Another one of those requirements are the requirements that come down from the state and or the federal government when it comes to water pipe replacement with PFAS and those types of things. The EPA has guidelines that we have to operate off of. And so some of these requirements that we're required to do are not simply us deciding to do them. They are mandates by the state and or federal government that we have to do this. And so these are this is just one way or a way that we can provide some funding for streets. Any questions so far? All right, so who pays the 0.5 income tax? So if you live and you work in Circleville, you would pay this additional 0.5 on top. You do not receive the 100% credit. If you live outside and you work in Circleville, you would pay the 0.5 income tax levy. And if you live in Circleville and you work outside, you will not pay the 0.5 and you receive a 100% credit on your Circleville municipal income tax.
So let me ask one question, and I love this slide. This is one of my favorite slides in this whole deck. I wish that we would have added a third column that says who benefits from the 0.5. And the answer to that is every single person listed.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you fall into the last category where you live in Circleville and work outside and you don't actually pay the income tax because you're receiving the credit,
Mm-hmm.
we don't ask that before we provide fire or safety services to your home.
Right.
So you still get those even though you don't pay for it.
Right. So the city of Circleville is a statutory city and we have a voter protected credit. And this is, we are a statutory city under the Ohio Revised Code. In May of 2014, Voter Initiative permanently protected the 100% credit for residents working outside the city. It was mentioned in the Judicial Committee that City Council cannot reduce this credit without voter approval. And so there's no double taxation for people who live in the city but work outside. They're not paying they're not paying where they work and where they live.
And so that was kind of a last minute addition to this discussion, as we had previously discussed the potential of looking at that
Mhm.
as a way to support this financial crisis that we're in.
Yep.
And then we found out that in the 2014 ordinance, it disallows.
In the 2014 ordinance, this was put on the ballot. So this was not a council initiated action like it previously had been done before. I believe in 2007, my memory serves me right, council did initially had the 50% credit. In the actual 14 language, the ordinance and the resolution to the Board of Elections, the commuter tax credit was placed on the ballot, therefore giving the people the opportunity to decide. That was also attached to the permanent tax levy. So that is why that is no longer an option for council itself. It would have to go back to the voters.
Thank you.
And I do have those Board of Elections results if you're curious to know how that specific levy passed, an income tax levy passed. So, accountability and transparency. For these funds, that would come in from this new income tax levy, they would be restricted to fire and EMS and street uses only through two separate funds, just like we've previously seen in the funds that we currently have set up right now. Those funds can only be used for those specific purposes. It's in our ordinance, and we are legally mandated to operate off of what our ordinance says. We have annual public reporting and audits that are done. We have an annual audit that is done by the city, done by the state every year. We provide annual reports every year from the auditor's office. And then at the bottom, city administration is committed to transparency of fiscal reports for all city revenue and expenses. And I specifically put in all, because even if people have questions now, we would be happy to provide expense and revenue reports, the ones that were referenced in today's report. So what happens without this levy? Funding ended on December 31st of 2024. Potential staff reductions or service cuts for fire and EMS, increased emergency response times, and accelerated street deterioration because we won't be able to continue to maintain them at the level that we have been. And I want to go back to specifically the staff reductions because we're solely talking about funding for fire and EMS. Without additional revenue for the city, additional staff members or positions could also have the potential of being reduced.
So, I guess that's one question I would have, I think to speak to the elephant in the room. So, again, you touched on it earlier, but we also had kind of in conjunction or within the same time frame of the levy, the SAFER grant, which was great and was an opportunity for us to, enhance the fire department even more. That levy is coming to, or I'm sorry, that grant period is coming to a natural end. So, I think the average person might say, well, why can't we reapply? And why can't we potentially get that again? Which you might wanna speak to that, but again, it's a grant, it's not a guarantee. There is a piece of this specific grant that requires us to keep them on staff, which obviously is a cost to the city as well. So I think it's important that when we talk about potential staff reductions, I know that that's not something that anybody wants to talk about, especially people that run for public office, but I don't personally see how it would be potential. If the levy doesn't pass, I don't know how we could potentially keep it staffed in the current level that it's staffed.
Yeah, we would not be able to keep staffing levels at the way that they are right now.
Okay, I mean, I just think it's important that people understand that it's not really a potential, it would absolutely have to happen based on not anyone's desire, but the feasibility of where would that money come from.
Right.
And then I think the interesting piece, which is to your last bullet point on this slide, could we come up with funding potentially, but it's not like we have excess funds, so what's gonna get cut in lieu of that? And I think the streets are, which you'll probably speak to, but that's the obvious target of what would get cut. Nobody wants that either, so, it's obviously a lose-lose from the standpoint of a service that we do provide to the citizens.
So part of this exercise in the administration was for all departments to submit their 2026 budget to the administration for them to look at, knowing that the funds from the 2019 levy were not going to be coming in anymore. That included $1.2 million worth of streets and parks funding that would be cut, in addition to positions that would need to be cut.
I think that's an important piece to capitalize on. So in the event, so essentially budgets were submitted under the attitude of this is what we have right now, which is no levy. And so with that potential, in the 2026 budget, it cuts $1.2 million of street and park funds.
Yep.
Okay. That's not good for anybody.
No. And so that's why I included it in with the fire and EMS, because we know how much we spent on fire in 2024 at the levels that we are currently at. Now, we all know that we have debt obligations that we will pay off in the next couple of years, but those amounts are $25,000,
Right.
$50,000. They don't get to the level of 2.5. When you add them all together, they don't equal the necessary $2.5 million.
Right. And so and again, I understand I'm summarizing this probably beyond what's due, but essentially, with failure of a levy, whatever it looks like, it's about a $2.5 million gap to make up. And in the proposed, I'm gonna say budget for 2026, which obviously isn't approved, but proposed, it cuts personnel and it cuts $1.2 million of streets.
Yeah. What is submitted to council though?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so timeline and next steps, I have this and two other slides. So the timeline and next steps, finance committee reviews tonight. The request is to forward with a recommendation. City council vote scheduled for June 3rd and held for 3 readings. If passed, the levy would be submitted to the Pickaway County Board of Elections for ballot placement before August 5th. That is the deadline. So again, specifying tonight's request from me as the mayor, Finance Committee would forward the ordinance and resolution to City Council on June 3rd with the recommendation for passage. This would allow the voters to consider critical funding for fire, EMS, and street improvements starting on January 1 of 2026. And to recap, this is a renewing of, but not necessarily renewing of, the 0.5 at the same rate with a clearer purpose, protecting public safety and maintaining infrastructure, and transparent, voter protected, and accountable.
Thank you. So, I think that gave us some really good takeaway and summary of kind of the funds that we have, where they're spent, and then funds that would potentially be lost if we continue without some sort of levy support. So, before I turn it over to questions, I am gonna ask the safety director to speak on behalf of, obviously, you know, a little bit of, your opinion so far as to where we stand. I know this is new to you in your current role, but you served us in a, consultation purpose, so I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add, or if we could get some insight as to your opinion as to this proposal.
Yes, I think we've looked at this, from, like every which way from Thursday, to try and figure this out. And when we do look at some of the things that has been mentioned here this evening about some of the increases on the fire and the calls for service, and what the folks here in the city of Circleville have now kind of they've become accustomed to,